All right, what's up, everybody? So today, this tutorial is going to be on training intensity and guidelines. I've been meaning to make this for a while now, and what this is going to do is basically this is going to run us basically bottom to top on what is training intensity, what are the guidelines, the training principles that I follow and I coach with. And I think this is going to just get everybody on the same page with everything, and this is going to be a good resource to have on here for the future, for future athletes, and just for refresher when you want to come back and rewatch this, and and take care of your zones, and just understand what's going on when we talk about zones. So let's just dive right in. Let's get into it. Spent a bit of time on this, but I wanted to be able to have a way for it to all flow and be able to deliver it to everybody. So let's hit the ground running. All right, so you chose a coach for a reason, right? Not only to guide you for the distance that you're looking to do, whether it's a 5K, marathon, sprint triathlon, Ironman, whatever it is. You may be looking for accountability. That's great. I can put workouts on there. You could get the workouts done if that's what we're looking for, and that's what's going to get you to the finish line. That's great. But chances are, if you're looking for a coach, you're looking to take your training in a direction that's just, more structured and better than the typical average age group triathlete. So you're also looking to know what intensity should I be training at, when and why, or maybe you're coming back or from another coach that you had a different experience with, or some injuries or something that you're dealing with, and you're just again looking for what intensity should I be at? What should I be doing? Or I'm not progressing. I've stagnated over the years. I've been doing this for years, and I'm just not progressing anymore. So what we're really talking about is being specific, specificity in your training, the amount of volume, how much you should be training, and the intensity. What should I be going easy? Should I be going hard? Should I be in the middle? Chances are when you come to a coach, you already have some type of base or some knowledge, and you're looking to just go to the next level. You're looking to take the next step, and you're looking to have some more structure. So let's get into it here. What is specificity? Your training must be specific for what you're training for. Think about this. If you're coming to get better at running or triathlon, going out and chopping wood in the driveway all day is not going to get you a better race result. Pretty obvious, right? So we need to be specific with our training towards our goals. If it's triathlon related, we're going to be swimming, biking, and running. If it's running, we're going to be running and doing some cross training. And are you going to get better results from redlining all your training sessions, going to the max, hitting it hard, beating yourself up, fatigue after fatigue, and just wearing your body down? Is that going to get you better results? And as well, are you going to get better results if you just said, you know what, I don't have the time to train anymore. I'm going to train 2 days a week. I'll be good for this half Ironman. I think I'm good. I'm just going to reduce my volume by about 75%. You're looking for specificity. How much do I need to do? How much volume do I have to do? When do I have to do it? And tell me how. And that's what a coach should be doing for you. When we talk about volume now, that's the amount of training that you're going to do. And that could be from a couple hours a week to even 12 to 16 hours a week. We need to hit that sweet spot between what is too little and what is too much. And experience plays a role in this, without a doubt. Beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Obviously, somebody who's looking to do a half marathon distance for the first time is not going to train exactly the same as somebody who's done this distance a dozen times before over the past several years and is looking for a PR in that distance. Their training is going to be different, and their volume of training is going to be different, and you need to understand that. So as well, other people who don't really know you as an athlete see you doing certain things training for a race that they're not doing because it's their first or second year in sport, and you've been doing this for 10 years. Of course your volume is going to be different. And that's the coach's role with the athlete as well, is to talk about volume. How much training should I be doing for what I want my results to be, and what my experience level is? And then it gets down to intensity. How hard am I supposed to train? Some ways are more effective than others, but overall, it's an overall approach for endurance sports is just intensity. It's the best overall thing that we need to do for you for race day to get you there. And that's an individualized approach as well. But there are some guidelines on intensity that every athlete should adhere to as we go through this. And that's what this big, really why this is all in here is I can tell you to train 8 hours a week. I can tell you to go swim, bike, and run. Remember, specificity. Go swim, bike, and run. Go train for 8 hours. Okay, but how? What's my intensity supposed to look like? And that's a very, very important factor on how you're going to get to the start line. Are you going to get there fatigued, overuse injuries, or fresh, motivated, and ready to put in a good effort that day? So, we're talking about volume. Here we go. 80-20 rule. A lot of things out there are described with this, just in life, 80-20, but it also is scientifically proven with endurance training. It's research-based. Tons of research based on this topic and the amount of intensity. And what is 80-20? So they really started this research topics with pro high-level endurance athletes, world-class athletes. They went to Norway where exceptional athletes were performing and trying to figure out what the modality was that was, making these athletes perform so well. And it was that 80% of their total volume, remember what volume is, the amount you train in a given period of time, was done at low intensity. And 20% of it was done at high intensity. And we're going to define as this goes through what really low intensity is and what high intensity is. Because actually, believe it or not, a lot of people don't actually understand what the difference is between these two. So there's also great success, age group athletes training as little as 45 minutes a day. So you're talking, you could have professional athletes training 2 hours a day, and that's going to be 14 hours a week, or even age group athletes, which are only training for a 45-minute session. They're going to train for about 6 to 7 hours a week. And implementing this type of structure within age group triathletes or age group endurance athletes, I should say, and world-class professional athletes, we're yielding great success and great results. And age groupers wound up doing age groupers in general wind up doing as little as 70% easy because, and we'll get into it in a minute, their volume isn't as much. So it's actually more important for the age grouper who's not doing the massive volume that a pro endurance athlete is doing to adhere to this more because there's less room to play with that percentage range and you wind up going over it way too much. Remember, 80% is actually 48 minutes of every hour of training. Should actually be done at a low intensity. All right, let's talk about intensity blindness. And the whole reason why this is very important is why people stagnate a lot after a few years of endurance sports is they fall into this moderate intensity rut. And what does that mean? Do you do 48 minutes of every hour easy at a low intensity pace? You may think you are, but we're going to dig in a little bit here and analyze what really low intensity is supposed to be. It's the border between low and high intensity is called the ventilatory threshold, VT, which you may see a bunch as it pops up or as we talk in the future about it. And that's when your breathing becomes labored. It's about 78% of your max heart rate. Training above this is very, very taxing on the body. So think about some of those runs you went on, maybe a group run with some friends. You might have been talking and getting some words in, but you were feeling a little bit taxed, out of breath. Chances are you were probably at that range above that, 78%, and probably what you thought was going to be an easy run wasn't an easy run. You were actually in that high intensity going towards that zone in that moderate intensity rut. Think about how many times over and over again you may have felt that way during what should have been a low intensity aerobic effort. So training above this is much more taxing. It's a very high cost to the body. We must incorporate high intensity training in a very precise way because as you'll see, we're going to break it down nice and easy, and you'll see that low intensity will be supposed to be done at a low intensity, and high intensity should be done at a high intensity. All right, habitual versus optimal. So choose a pace at 75% of your max heart rate. Remember what the VT was. That was 78%. So if you went out for that group run again and you're feeling a little taxed, a little labored, out of breath, a few miles in, or mile 6, mile 7 of a 10-mile run because you're running with the group that was a little bit faster, and it was supposed to be an endurance run, more of an easy day. I assure you that if you took your effort down to 75% of your max heart rate, it's going to feel a lot slower than what you're used to running with those group runs. And you're going to be like, wow, this feels a lot slower than what I've usually been training at, which is fine. That means you've now gone below that 78% threshold, that VT that we were talking about. When you habitually train above that 78%, like we talked about before, is fatigue just starts accumulating workout after workout, and you actually never fully recover from your workouts. That's when you go for that too hard of a run, and you're supposed to have a bike the next day, and you wake up. We've all had these days. You wake up for that bike ride and your legs are sore. You just can't get up. You're not motivated. It's because you've probably stacked a bunch of fatigue week after week, training session after training session, and you may not even feel it. You just think this is the way I'm supposed to feel in a training plan or peaking for a race or whatever it is. And sometimes you will feel fatigued, but if it's this chronic fatigue, maybe you need to take a step back and say, maybe I am actually training too hard, too much. And there's a very fine line with what too much intensity is, where that borderline is. And it inhibits fitness development. Your progress actually slows. So what we want to do is balance everything in a building period of a few weeks. Do accumulate fatigue, but not over fatigue. We're not going high intensity all the time. And then when we come back for that deload week, which some of you have learned to coin that term recently, the step down week of volume, that's when your body gets that quick recovery jolt. You actually gain your fitness within that week, and you go fresh into the next build, and you're going to build some more volume. And with volume comes a little bit more intensity, because now you have more time to train at the higher intensity because your volume is more. So as you get deeper into a half Ironman plan, or marathon plan, that's why you're able to do longer, harder efforts deeper into your plan, because your volume is more. You may have went from just a few hours a week early on or with base building to now you're doing 10, 12 hours a week. So your 20% can actually be more. So if you've watched some of these, especially 70.3 racing, their times have just been astronomical. Why are endurance athletes' times, even in running, still dropping, still getting faster? It's, yes, some to do with some efficiency and some equipment that's out there, but times are improving because training's improving. What programs have been working stick around. It's no secret now what training works. So when one athlete is on a certain protocol of training and somebody else wants to race against them, they're going to find out what type of training they're doing and is working for them, and they're going to do it, and then they're going to stick to it. And then you see some athletes try and do some other things, other type of work, and chances are they usually wind up coming back to what works, because that's what's out there right now, and that's what's helping all these endurance athletes. So training's changed since its inception of the triathlons at the end of the 70s and 80s, where it was go hard, go home, hammer every day, every day, every day. It's because people got smarter over the last couple decades, and they're just being able to take their training and what their body is actually, they're changing their body structure from the inside out. And when you do that properly with training, you're able to make your body move through space that much more efficiently and that much faster. So good news. Any athlete can train to this 80-20 balance. And that's, like I said, from the person who's just doing 45-minute workouts a day, 5 to 6 days a week, up to somebody who's training to try and qualify for the World Championships. You can create breakthroughs in performance. You train easier. You actually race faster. There is some bad news with it, though. Unfortunately, even though any athlete can train for this, not all athletes are coachable to this. It's ego-driven, and the world of Strava now, when everybody can see your data and your analytics on there, it's unfortunate. It does take a tough pill to swallow, but prove them wrong on race day. Race day is what matters. Those results just hang on the internet forever. What you might do on a training run 5 weeks ago, nobody really cares about that. But when you peak for that race day and all your friends know you're doing that race, that's what's going to last. And, that's what you want. That's what you're paying for. You paid to go do this race, whatever it is. You're paying for a coach to help you get there. So why not take the advice and the research-based advice that the coach is giving you to actually perform better? So here we go. I want to talk about quick my 80/20 success story. I got into the endurance sports early 2017 or late 2016 when I just started. I wanted to, I was kind of falling out of shape after we had two boys and life was getting crazy, and I said I just want to go for a run. You've all heard my story before probably of how I got back into this. Started with that 5K. I wanted to start doing something. I just get my shoes on, go out the door. It was all good, right? So, think back to those times when you started your endurance sports journey. You had a goal, you signed up for something, you started training, you started doing some stuff, started progressing, right? Started doing longer stuff. It was getting, you were getting faster, you had some progress. Because remember, anybody who's a beginner, it's new stimulus to the body. You go do some swimming, biking, and running, and you do more of it, you're going to get better and you're going to progress. And that's what happened. We progressed. First year, next year, we were still progressing. I was just doing what other people were doing. Sure, what bike ride are you doing? Yeah, okay, I'll go off 20 miles, 30 miles. Do you want to run after? Sure, yeah, I'll run after. There was really no structure or anything. I was just increasing my distances, signing up for other events, multi-sports, want to do my first triathlon, all this good stuff. I did my first half Ironman. I believe it was in 2018. I learned how to swim over that winter. Did my first half Ironman. Did it pretty well for what I thought I was capable of. And just kept going. Everything was next. Let's keep going. And then, unfortunately, in 2019, towards the end of that year, just things started to hurt. Overuse injuries, plantar fasciitis, IT band syndrome with that runner's knee. Things where I was like, wow, this is tough, man. I don't know what's going on right now. And then good thing is I was actually training to go do a 50K trail run in early 2020. So I was working through that winter, and that's when my body was really starting to resist a little bit. And COVID happened and shut all the races down. And I was able to halt all my race plans for a little bit and really start to analyze what was going on. Why is this happening to me? Why do I feel this way? And when I started doing some research and digging in about actual structured training, I realized, oh wow, maybe I was pushing myself a little too much all the time. And I am guilty of it. I used to go for my midweek run, my 5 or 6 mile run. I used to go on, my break at lunch or whatever I had at work. And I would habitually go run almost as fast as I could for 5 or 6 miles, out of breath, smoke myself, just tired afterwards, and think that if I wasn't running at or faster than the paces I was running the week before, I'm not progressing. And that is just a huge downward spiral to injury, overuse, burnout, and not wanting to do the sport anymore, whether that's swimming, biking, running, or all three. So with that, I was able to dive into what was going on. I had to slow down a little bit naturally just because I had to heal a little bit. I continued through with training, was a little smarter. So I threw in a lot of specificity and really honed in on what I needed to do, when I needed to do, how I'm going to do it, and progressed through 2020. Everything started to open back up. And the last 2.5 years, up till including now, I have been able to continually chip away at the block by adding a little bit extra detail into my training. And this is nothing that can happen over one race build. This change in, just intensity top to bottom. It is a learning curve that you will learn a little more season after season, year after year. You're going to learn some things over the off season, put them into practice going into the next season, and get better year after year. So this is not something that myself and you, coach and athlete, can figure out and bring you to the top level within 6 months. It's a constant learning and bettering yourself season after season. And even little incremental goals and gains. Remember, you're getting older, but you're getting probably faster and more efficient by using these training systems, and that's pretty incredible. So till this day, I've been doing this now for about three solid full years now, this type of specific training. I really started it, really hammered it down the year I did my full Ironman in 2021. And I was like to the T with where my intensity needed to be up until race day. And I showed up on race day super fresh, super motivated, and had a really good effort that day. Sounds all great, right? So what prevents someone from training this way with this 80-20 methodology? Well, some people have a smaller intensity range. And what do I mean by that? Look at somebody who can run very fast 10K effort. I'm talking 30-minute 10K, 5:25 a mile, right? Professional athlete. Great. Their easy range can probably be like 6:30 a mile to 7, or just 6:30 might be their easy range when they break down, their zones. Versus now you have an age group person or someone getting into sport which can only, they do a 60-minute 10K, 10:50 a mile. There's a very finite, smaller range of what really could be easy for them before they're just walking. So it is hard. It's a hard pill to swallow for a newer athlete, and I don't want to say slower athlete, but someone who is on, is not putting up those 5, 6, 7-minute mile numbers, because there is a smaller low intensity range that you need to be in. So it's very important for them to actually pay more attention than it is for the professional athlete. And of course, they're doing lower volume. So you look at a professional athlete, if they train 20 hours a week, they can train up to 4 hours at a very high intensity. If you're only training 5 hours a week, you're only really up to about an hour of high intensity. You need to make sure that you're not spilling over into that higher intensity for those other 4 hours, because it's not going to help. You're not going to get the benefits that you need, which you're going to see from the lower volume, the lower aerobic intensity that you need to be putting in. We also have lack of good coaching, contradicting plans. You can, and I could even do it too. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, I got this race in 4 or 5 months, this is what I want to do, I could hammer you with high intensity and hope you don't get hurt for race day. You will gain some fitness for sure, but you're going to have a lot higher percentage of overuse injury or injury in general, and a lot bigger chance of burnout. You may start missing workouts because you're so fatigued, and it's not sustainable. I'm looking at you. We're invested in each other if you've signed on board to help me coach you, where I hope that we're not together for just one race or one season. I hope that we're going to be able to build over the next few years and work together. And I want you to be motivated and fresh. I don't want you to get hurt and miss workouts. So by training this way, some people may say, oh, they're not as hard as my last coach was. Some people find that as a good thing. But actually some athletes, like I said, some of those ego-driven athletes that think they have to go hard all the time aren't going to like this type of coaching. Until you give it a chance and see what the results are, then I can assure you you're all in. Which, what I was talking about, this is the last one right here, is the lack of buy-in. If I want to be fast, I got to go fast. And that's just not the case. You're going to train a little bit slower overall, but you're going to race faster. Trust me, it works. And remember, we talked about ego, Strava, or being in that slow swim lane in a master swim group. And you go there and fight every day. You just swim really hard because you want to be into that next swim lane. You don't want to be in that first swim lane. But guess what? You're not getting the benefit that you need of that low intensity exercise for that swimming. Or your average speed. You go out for a bike ride, and unless you hit 18 miles per hour, it's not a good ride. And you don't want that up on Strava. So it's a windy day and you just hammer hard into the wind because you need to see that 18 miles per hour. You think it wasn't a good day and you didn't gain anything from it. Or being dropped. You're out on the path. You're like, I'm going easy today. All good. Just me, myself, and I. And then somebody just takes you down on the path and you're like, not today. And then it turns into a sufferfest. It happens to me from time to time. I have to catch myself, and then I'll have to change the rest of my week, how it lines up, because I know I went too hard that day. But, it happens. These are just some of the things that prevent people from training this way. Natural or preferred paces. Like I said, when I used to go run my 5 or 6 mile midweek runs, I would just say, I got to run at whatever it is, 8:20 a pace, and that's it. That's where I got to be. I got to get faster than that. And I would only train that way. So some people is just like, oh, what's your paces at? They can say, yeah, I swim about 2 minutes per 100. I'm a 9-minute a mile, runner, and I do about 18 miles per hour on the bike. And that's just about all they do all the time. And chances are it's just a little too much to gain the benefits of what you would get from actually balancing your low intensity and your high intensity. Also, we're talking about intensity blindness. Low intensity is still done above that VT threshold. So what they think at those paces I just described is easy is actually a little too high and is above that 78% that we talked about. And that habitual inertia, if you're running a 9-minute a mile 10K, your easy runs probably shouldn't be 9:15 a mile. We got to break habits. And that's what I was doing for a while, and that's how I wound up getting a little bit hurt, was because if I ran a 10K race and I ran 9 minutes a mile, then I think when I go run my 5-miler next week, my training run in the middle of the week, well, I should be running 8:50, because if I did 9 at a 10K and I'm only running 5, I should be doing that at 8:50. And that'll only work so long before you just wind up getting hurt, unfortunately. So these are the benefits. Less fatigue between workouts. You'll feel fresher. You can get all your workouts in during the week. You'll have stronger hard days when it's that track session or you got to push on that trainer or whatever it is. You're going to feel good. You're going to feel motivated. You're going to be able to put the power and the speed down. You're going to increase your fitness and your endurance. And the biggest part is you're actually going to enjoy your training a little more. I thoroughly enjoy my training now because I've now separated these intensities and I'm just gaining the benefits of it. And when I go on a nice run now, I can just hold the conversation because I know it's low intensity, easy, can just chill as opposed to just smashing myself like I used to. If you're newer to this, if someone's seeing this in the future for the first time, and if you're that person that has that habitual intensity blindness, they're in that moderate intensity rut all the time, what we have to do is what some people can do is this. It's called the week of slow. You take an entire week and you force yourself to go slower. All your workouts. Find where you typically run. If you go out and do your runs at 9 minutes a mile, slow down. Warm up, get into that 9 minutes a mile, and then throw the parachute out, back it down, and get down to about 9:30, whatever it is. Just slow. It should feel slow. You're forcing yourself to slow down. You'll actually be surprised at how much better you begin to feel. Recheck yourself and make sure you're staying slow all week. That's what you would do, is just, if you start seeing yourself pick up the intensity a little bit, back it down. This is a great gateway to the 80-20 because it really starts to mentally show you and your body what slowing down really feels like. And believe it or not, it'll actually expedite any type of recovery you need from any fatigue you've built up from a prior plan. There's 3 intensity ranges that we're going to talk about. Low intensity. The upper limit is that ventilatory threshold, that near 78% of max heart rate, and the bottom end is about 60%. So when we talk low intensity, we're about 60% to about that 75, 78% of max heart rate. I even like to just bump it down a pinch more. So if you were between 60% and 70% of your max heart rate, you're in the low intensity zone. You get improved aerobic capacity, that VO2 max, that number you hear a lot, which is the use of oxygen inside the body, a stronger heart, increased blood volume. It's almost impossible to max out the aerobic system by going too hard. So if you went hard every single day, every run, every cycling workout you have to do, every swim, you're actually not going to be able to max out your aerobic system. I've actually tested in a laboratory last year on my VO2 max, and just the numbers that I was using based on my field testing, which we'll get into in a little bit, actually matched up very closely to what the lab had. And he was very impressed at just my overall aerobic capacity, and I explained to him how I was training. And same with that, he just said, keep on going with what you're doing, because what you're doing is actually building the most efficient aerobic system that you could possibly build. You're also going to use fat as fuel because you're at a lower heart rate. This again, glycogen levels, fat levels, what you're using for fuel. You'll actually use fat as fuel when you're in your low intensity zones. And you guys actually a more abundant amount of energy than your glycogen. And that's key for endurance athletes, especially when you get into longer distance events. Fatigue resistance, because you're exposing yourself to fatigue. You're able to train longer, more volume, and that also enhances the brain's fatigue. And what do I talk about that? If you go hard all the time, you're fatiguing your body, your muscles. You're not fatiguing your brain. Once you can start to spread the gap between low and high intensity, you're able to not just fatigue your muscles, you're able to fatigue your mind because you're able to go now longer, and you'd be surprised at what the mind is capable of allowing you to do if you train it properly. Whereas you would think, I'm not, I can never go for an hour run. That's crazy. But when we slow the intensities down, we're able to get you to do things for a longer period of time. And that also trains your brain in knowing that you're capable of doing this. Case in point is why I love trail running and why I've done a few ultras now, 50K distances and a 50 miler, is because I was training my brain. I was enhancing my brain fatigue. That training is done at a lower intensity than even marathon training or Ironman training. And I was able to enhance my brain fatigue and be able to push myself a little further because my muscles were there. They were able to go, but it's your brain that you're training in order to make that connection and keep going. Moderate intensity is now going to be above the VT, 78% and 92% of your max heart rate. People spend too much time in this zone. This range overlaps with race intensity. So this is, we're just talking about training, and there is some time to be in this zone when we're doing race specific and we're getting closer to races and we're doing certain race pace efforts. So there is a time and place to be here, but it's not all the time like a lot of people dip into it too much. So there's a time and place for this zone. This does overlap the race intensity. High intensity, 93% of max heart rate and above, just generates a large amount of lactate, boosts aerobic capacity, but in a different way. It's the final ingredient to the recipe, very taxing on the body, so we put it in small doses. These will be those VO2 max intervals, very short intervals on the track, very hard pushes and sprints on the bike, but there is a time and place for it, and you do need it in your training, and as long as you're not abusing it, you're going to get the max benefits from it. So how to train with specificity. We're going to test and collect data. On swimming, we're going to use pace, heart rate, or RPE. Biking, power, heart rate, RPE. Running, we're going to use heart rate, power, pace, or RPE. Now, this depends on the devices you have, what's available to you, what's easiest, and how you want to track things. And we'll get into what's better for each one shortly. So we need to do some data collection. You can go into a laboratory, they'll hook you up to a machine, they'll monitor how much oxygen you're consuming, they'll take your lactate from your blood samples, but that's not really conducive to testing every 4 to 6 weeks or every 2 months, whatever it is. So we do field testing. It's the most popular. For power, we can do that on the bike using pedals. The pedal power meters, crank power meters are on the trainer. Running, they do have the Stride foot pod out there. That is a great device for run power. If we're doing heart rate, we can do wrist-based. It's not as accurate, especially while running. Cycling, it's okay, but running, I really recommend a heart rate strap. It's the preferred method. And a couple tips on that. Before you actually put it on, before your run or your cycle, the battery's usually in the middle. That's where the sensor is, especially on the Garmin. It'll be white, blue, or yellow. The sensors are actually right next to it. Wet those a little bit before you put it on because it will get a better connection right away and start monitoring your heart rate at a more accurate number when you do start. And also change your battery from time to time. Make sure it is connecting to the watch at the beginning. So when you hit the beginning to run, it will say heart HRM paired. If it's not doing that, chances are your battery might be dead. I would just recommend changing it every 6 months anyway. They are cheap batteries. They're only about $1 or $2 each. Change the battery out. Note when you did it. Just do January and June and you should be fine. Lactate threshold. We're going to talk about that. It's intensity at which lactate accumulates in your bloodstream. The highest intensity that can be sustained for 1 hour. So think about it. If you can run a 10K in 58:42, you're running at lactate threshold, that you're running at that level for your entire hour. This sits slightly above that VT, the ventilatory threshold, so you will be out of breath. You're going to be, trying to get some more oxygen in, and it's gonna hurt. It's gonna be a tough effort. That's what lactate threshold should feel like. Swimming, pace, define low, moderate, high intensity. Lactate threshold swim pace test. So this is now we're gonna get into the testing of how we're gonna actually test in all 3 disciplines on this. Problem with the swimming pace and why I don't really go after it too much with a lot of athletes that I'm helping coach is majority are just average swimmers. And unless we spend specific training blocks on increasing your swim and analyzing and doing things, it's also, it's tough just because it's the smallest amount of time in a triathlon. So if we're going to spend all of our time getting better at that, we're going to be taking time away from really specifically getting on with your bike and your run. So if we dig too deep into your zones, and there's not a large disparity of zones for just an average swimmer. If you're swimming at typically 2 or 2:10, 100 in the pool, then that's your average pace. How much more can we really slow down? You should try and have your easy days and really be slow and work on form and then have some intervals built in. But unless you're a really good swimmer that's doing like 120 or 130s for the 100, then you can slow down. You're a good swimmer. You've been swimming for a while. So if you're a very good swimmer, then we can definitely work on that with you and worry about and fix paces. But so I'm not going to get too much into the here swimming pace wise and how we would do those testings, but they are on here. Lactate threshold swim pace test. We'd warm up 200 to 300 yards easy, swim 400-yard time trial, rest for 2 minutes, swim another 200-yard time trial. We'd calculate your critical velocity, which is your lactate swim pace. Your critical velocity is for 200 is going to be a 400 time minus your 200 time. So if you did 400 yards in 7:15, 200 yards in 3:33, we're going to convert that to minutes. We're going to divide by 200. That means you did 54 yards per minute. We're going to convert that back to 100. And thank God there's so many calculators online that can do this for me. And it would be 1.85 minutes per 100 yards, or layman's terms, 155 per 100 would be your way we would set your zones up off of. There is an alternate test to do that. Best for beginners or intermediates. You'd warm up, swim 1,000 yards as fast as you can, record the time, total time divided by 10. That's going to be the easiest way to come up with that. And that would be, an example here, would come up with 140 for 100 yards. So that's the swimming. There's some of the tests. So if we ever get involved with your swimming and want to do testing, we would get into this and we would review how to do the testing on this. Cycling, heart rate or power. So we're talking field test here, 30-minute time trial. And again, some of you may have done this on Zwift, FTP test, but you could do this out in the field. And actually, I recommend it too. If you're using your power meter on your bike, I have a different bike that I do use a power meter on out on the road, a different bike than I use back in my garage here. So I would do an FTP test on the trainer. So I have my numbers on the trainer, and then I would do an FTP test out on the road. And that's so I would know what my bike power numbers would be. Field test, 30-minute time trial, safe, find a flat spot, few stopping points, can be done indoors if that's all you have. Warm up 10 minutes, an effort of 30 minutes steady. And we're going to take your average BPM for the final 20 minutes. This is for heart rate. And we have to account for that cardiac lag, because as you put effort in, your heart rate does take some time to catch up to that. And we'll talk about why power is more important and a better indicator of intensity. It's a very uncomfortable test though, and we retest as your training progresses. Also known as the FTP test, I can take heart rate data off of that on Zwift or on Training Peaks. There is an alternate test. You warm up 10 minutes, accelerate to the highest level you can for 30 minutes. When your heart rate plateaus, we'll note that heart rate level. Not as accurate, but good for beginners. And cycling, remember, is the longest portion of a triathlon. It's the most time you're going to spend. So worrying about your cycling zones and being diligent with your cycling zones is going to yield great results. And just because your lactate heart rate isn't improving doesn't mean fitness isn't. Will improve your ability to hold that level. So just because you did a heart rate test, you may not have power. You may just have a regular trainer, or just you don't power on your bike. You do this test and your lactate heart rate is 155. And you go test it again 2 months later, and it's 155. Unfortunately, we can't judge off of that if your fitness actually improved. But it just may mean, you may have only been able to do an hour bike at that time. Now you're biking for 3 hours, and your LTHR is still 155. We can't define that and know that your fitness improved with that just because your heart rate stayed the same. Nothing really changes that. It's just really to find where your heart rate zone is, and then create zones and to know where you need to be. And heart rate can be compromised by conditions, temperature. It's going to be a lot different if you're doing this when it's 40 degrees as opposed to 80 degrees. Hills, that's why I recommend on a flat area. You may not live in a flat area. And also sleep, stress, and nutrition. Did you sleep the night or two before? How's your stress, with life and training right now? Did you eat like crap the day before? All that can affect your heart rate. So that's why we would go to cycling power, which we talk about FTP, functional threshold power. That's the amount of work you do over time. It's the gold standard of measuring cycling output. Requires a device attached to the bike called a power meter. There's many different devices, but consistency is key. No one device is better than the other as long as you're getting consistent power numbers. I'm going to do FTP test on my bike with my power meter. If I went and did the FTP test on your bike with your power meter, it may come back with different results. But I'm always going to be using my bike and that power meter, and that's the consistency we're looking for, and that's why it's key, and that's why that's listed there. Same thing, I'm not going to get too involved on how we do this, because when it's time to do the field tests, it's going to be all noted on the calendar and Training Peaks, or you're just simply selecting the FTP test on Zwift, or you're warming up and you're doing this out on the street, and you're going to put out a high level of effort for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, you're going to cool down. Your FTP is the average power over that 30 minutes. The great part is there's no cardiac lag with power. Once you start pedaling at a certain power, it's going to instantaneously give you the numbers that we need to find when we're talking about power. If we can't do that because it's just too taxing or you're more of a beginner, we could do a 20-minute effort. And we're going to multiply that by 0.95, and we're going to get that. So if you did 220 watts for 20 minutes, that would yield an FTP of 209 watts. And the results of these tests we will talk about in a little bit and teach you how to break them down. We would retest as your training progresses. Efficiency always plays a role in real world results. So just because one person you could have two identical people, 5'10", 180 pounds, same bike, same everything, putting out 220 watts. Who's going to go faster? The person that's going to be more efficient. Are they in a better position on the bike? Are they on their aero bars as opposed to being just on the handlebars? What are they wearing? Is this one person wearing a speed suit, a tri-suit, versus the other person that's wearing a very baggy t-shirt while they're riding? Does one person have an aero helmet versus the other? So there is more we can add on besides increasing your power. We can talk about efficiency on the bike as well. That will help you get to higher speeds and better results. One quick note on cycling, cadence, that's what we're talking about again, a little bit of efficiency. Speed at which you rotate the pedals. 75 to 95 is the average RPM. Beginners fall between 80 and 85. It's that kind of moderate cadence rut. They're just kind of grinding at a little bit too low. So be diligent, especially when you're on the trainer. Try and get a higher cadence. If you have to switch down to another gear to get you ability to get your cadence up, do that. The best cadence is always about 90 RPM. That's the kind of the standard average that people try and shoot for when they're just on good, smooth, solid ground. Would be 90 RPM is a good place to practice being at. Higher RPMs delay fatigue in the body. They actually use different types of muscle fiber. So if you're grinding away, you're actually going to tire yourself out more, even if you're putting out the same watts. And it actually uses less glycogen because it's more efficient. So again, this is how we learn to be more efficient on the bike so we can have a good run, which leads me into the next piece, running. Running is hard. It stresses the body, and it is the highest risk of injury. Somebody said this recently, and it was, a strong triathlon result will always be the product of a strong run. So think about that. If I don't think anyone ever really said that was a great performance you put up, but your run sucked. So that's how important a run is in a triathlon, especially when you're talking the half and full distance. You can have, there's less room for a junk swim. You may lose 5 or 10 minutes. On the bike, as long as you had a decent bike, it all comes down to the run. Did you have a good run? A strong run is always, a strong triathlon result is always because of a strong run finish. So humans were made to run efficient and long. That's just the way we were built. So we are able to, if we train properly, the leaps and bounds that we can actually make within our systems is pretty substantial. The biggest mistake, though, is the incorrect distribution of intensity. And this is why I find run zones most important. And this is why I really like to dive in specifically on people's running. And that's what we typically spend the first year together as a coach and athlete really honing in on, is because you can get your biggest gains and best race results, especially for triathlon, obviously, by having a better run. Most people just have, if they're struggling with their triathlon result, is because of a poor run at the end. So that's why I like to hone in on the running. And it's also, again, it's the most stressful and the highest risk of injury. So if we can get that taken care of and really understand that, working together over the course of the first year or the first season, you can then build on that a little bit, and then we can get into some other disciplines the next year. Heart rate testing, lactate heart rate. We want to be able to figure that out for running. Same test as cycling, minus the bike. So it's the most consistent results are recorded with a heart rate strap. Like I said, definitely go-to heart rate strap. You'll get the most. If we're going to do heart rate based training, we need consistent results. We're going to do a field test. We take the average over that field test, and then we get your lactate heart rate, average BPM for the final 20 minutes of a 30-minute test. There are some alternate testing that we could do. We could warm up. You can accelerate to the highest effort we can sustain for 30 minutes. When your heart rate plateaus, we'll note that heart rate level. Although, again, same thing. It is weather, diet, stress sensitive. It is heart rate. Heart rate does have a lot of variability, so we have to make sure that we're getting good results. And monitoring pace is also another method we could do with running. We really can't do that with cycling, because if you're training by pace with cycling, I would just recommend just stop, because there's too many outlying factors. When you're actually traveling at 18, 19, 20 miles per hour and you have a crosswind, it's going to affect your miles per hour and your pacing way too much to have any type of consistent data to be worried about with pacing. There's just too many variables. But with running, there's slower velocities involved. There's less outside factors, so you could technically do a little bit of play with these zones with threshold pace. It's just another area that we can look at. I like to look at heart rate and pace and join the two together, and we can kind of see where everything lies in between. Pace can be used in running, unlike cycling. 30-minute test, same as the lactate heart rate test. We're just going to find out your threshold pace. Average pace over 30 minutes, substituting pace versus heart rate. The alternate test, again, can be a 20-minute average, and we would times that by 0.95. Thankfully, all you have to do is, when I pop a test on a calendar, you just got to perform the test as stated, and I do all the calculations for you. Throw back your zones, and when we talk about zones, which you'll see shortly, you'll understand where to be in those zones. So, running, threshold pace, there's a shorter test, flat course, warm up 10 minutes, play with your pace until your heart rate settles into your established LTHR, because we would have figured that out by a prior test. Maintain this heart rate for 10 minutes. The pace at this heart rate is close to your threshold pace. I don't typically use that test very often. Not many people, but there is a way to do power, and that is actually the best modality to get for running. I do have a power meter, and I actually don't even train by power, because I've gotten so good at knowing where I should be in my heart rate zones and even going by perceived effort. But I have been tracking the data for the last couple years. I do track my average power for my races, my run races, and just see where things are, so I can compare where my power levels are, if they're down or they're up. It is a newer technology. Power is an output rather than an outcome. So what you're putting out for power, it is reading right then and there, and that's why power is the most important and easiest thing to actually look at between cycling and running to figure out what your effort level actually is. So we would look at lactate threshold running power. It would be called RFTP. There's a couple ways to do that. There's a track session we can do. We can warm up. We can do all that. Good thing about the Stride app with the Stride pod is it kind of calculates all this for you after you put in some hard efforts. So that's just another way to go about it. And then there's always RPE. Don't worry about what these zones are on the side here, because we're going to talk about them in a little bit. But they do have this zone, this RPE. If we were going by RPE, this is where we would be looking at. And we'll get into the zones and what zones are in a little bit. The recommended data measuring, again, this is by, I would say, just what is more accurate. Swim, we would go by pace. Power, that could be like a VASA trainer at home if you have some type of device, and a land-based swim trainer. RP in the swim, and heart rate would be last in the swim. Biking, we would want power would be the number one thing we would want to look at. Then we'd look at heart rate and RP after that. Running, power would give us the most consistent results. Pace, actually, they say trumps heart rate a little bit, but there are some factors with pace, just as there are with heart rate. So I think they're kind of even. And then RPE. Then we would create zones. So you're going to do this field testing, right? I just wanted to go over what type of field testing you may have to do at some point. You're going to get field tested, you're going to get a result, or it just loads up and I'm going to get your result. And I'm going to do all the calculations, figure it out, and then I'm going to plug them into these zones right here. Zone 1 is easy. That's what we call easy. Zone 2 is called moderate. Zone X is we try and stay away from in most of our training, especially our easy days. There is some time to be in there when we're doing some race-specific efforts. Zone 3 is threshold. Zone Y is just an area, very small area, when we'll discuss it, between threshold, interval, and repeats. They try and if you're going to go hard on intervals, they want you to kind of jump over that zone to get the better benefits of it. And there's certain percentages for these zones. We'll break it down. Zone 1, very low intensity. Hold back to a pace slower than your natural pace. Remember we talked about that? This is reserved for warm-ups, cool-downs, and active recovery. When we say, hey, go for a couple-mile run, shake the legs out after race day, active recovery, that's what we're talking about, zone 1. And when we go back to that RPE scale, that's zone 1 right here. Really easy and easy, just something above rest, basically, is really that zone 1. Zone 2 is the foundation of training. The upper limit corresponds with the VT, the ventilatory threshold. Must stay in zone 2 when called for. Large portion of time is spent in the zone. Increased fat burning and a more fatigue-resistant brain. Allows us to go longer and further. Zone 2 is right here in that moderate intensity, but we're staying out of that sort of hard. We want to be below that. So zone 1 and zone 2 mixed together is going to be your easy stuff. Zone X, again, that moderate intensity rut. Avoiding it is key objective. May not feel too uncomfortable, but just hard enough to dig yourself into a hole. It's those days when you feel good on an easy run and you just start going a little too fast. You start fading into that zone. Minimal value with increasing fitness. Generates a very high fatigue, affects future workouts, and you only really dip into that zone X for race-specific intensity levels. And again, when we look back, that zone X is going to be that intensity rut right there that we're trying to stay away from. Zone 3, lactate threshold intensity, used liberally in training for all distances. Athlete speed at lactate threshold is best predictor of race performance. So what you're doing at that remember that LT lactate threshold, what you're doing during a 10K effort, we can do a lot on that number and see where you're going to kind of be on race day at certain distances. Training at or near this intensity is a powerful way to increase your LT speed, but again, it's got to be a certain amount on the right amount of days to get into that. Remember that zone Y? It's not as detrimental as zone X. Zone X is that big we want to stay away from on those easy and moderate days, but it's a very small window. It isn't very targeted in any of the workouts. It's just a little too fast for threshold workouts, that zone 3 stuff, and a little too slow for high intensity workouts in 4 and 5. And that falls somewhere, we put it in with, it's the bottom edge of that. This feels really hard. Like if you're going to train and you need to be in this area right here that's really hard, train a little harder and get into that zone 4 and start really making it feel, really, really hard. Zone 5, developing efficiency and fatigue resistance at high intensities, faster than race speeds. So this is intervals on the track, 400s, 800s, stuff that's going to be at 5K or greater pace, faster pace. It makes race speeds easier. It's fast, and fast is hard. Just remember that. Very short bursts, and pace and heart rate measuring is tough to register. Think about it. If you're going to do a quick 400 effort, it's hard because there's lag to get your heart rate up to read where you're at. The biggest thing is power. If you know what your power number is at a certain range, you'd be able to look at your watch, start running fast, know you're at whatever it is, 330 watts on your stride pod, and you would know that that's where you need to be for that effort. So there is a little lag there. So knowing what your feeling is on a 5K effort and running a little harder than that is key. You'll start to learn that over time. Done at the highest level you can sustain for the duration without fading. So basically, if you have 4 800-meter efforts, you're gonna try and run each 800-meter effort at the same, whatever it takes, a minute, 2 minutes, whatever it is that your 800 needs to take. You want to run each one steady and not burn out towards the end, and that would be the intensity you're supposed to be at. Let's look up some sample swim zones based off of field testing, right? So now we've field tested. We talked about that before. Sample athlete, they did a 1,000-yard test. Said go swim 1,000 yards. They did 145, and 145 yards was their critical velocity, which is 57.14. We plug all this stuff in here. What you really need to look at is the swim pace range here. So we talked about easy, moderate, zone 1, zone 2. You would have a copy of this after your testing, and you would know that if you want to go real easy, you should be swimming at 205 to 220. 205 to 155 is fast. The fastest you should be swimming on an easy day or an easy swim, warm up, cool down, should be anywhere in this range right here. When we start doing workouts, intervals, doing hundreds, 50s, 25s, whatever type of workout we're doing with freestyle here, we want to avoid this, and we want to try and push you a little bit and get into this next range here, where if we're doing some longer efforts, some race specific efforts, maybe we're looking at 145 to 149. If we're doing some really short, fast intervals, we want to work down into this range, and that's where you should be. Just remember, try and stay away from here, because you'll get the biggest gain working in this zone right here for your swimming. So a sample swim workout would be warm up, zone 1, 250 yards. Zone 2, 500 yards. Then do 5 times 50 yards, zone 4, with a 20-second rest in between. Zone 2, 500. Zone 1, 500 yards. And then you could just look back at chart, and you would know what paces you need to be for that type of effort. Sample cycling zones based off field testing. So you did FTP test. You got 130 watts. 30-minute test average. If no power, let me get a little sun off me. There we go. Look at that. Cycling FTP test, 130 watts, 30-minute test average. If no power, we'll determine off of heart rate zones. But if we have power, this is what we want to go by. We're going to get FTP. So you did 30-minute test, 130 watts. We're going to figure out zone 1, zone 2. This is your easy stuff right here. You want to stay out of that on just your regular aerobic rides. And if we're doing interval work, we want to be somewhere in these ranges up here. So let's look at a sample workout. Athlete typically rides at 110 watt average for an hour. So when we talk, you're like, yeah, I go on for like an hour a couple times a week. I usually average about 110 watts. Okay, so we figure out your FTP. Your FTP was 130. Well, now you're going to be doing a structured workout. You're going to warm up zone 1, 5 minutes, zone 2, 20 minutes, 3 times. We're going to do 5 minutes, zone 3, with 3 minutes rest recovery at zone 1. Zone 2, 5 minutes, zone 1, 6 minutes, total 60-minute workout. So instead of just riding at 110 watts, we're now going to put you through a 60-minute workout. What do we notice here? Warm up, very below what you usually do, 65 to 91, easy, right? Then we're hitting zone 2, starting to get, a nice moderate aerobic range right there, still below that 110. And then we're hitting our structure here, which is 5 minutes, zone 3, with 3 minutes, zone 1. We're hitting 118 to 130 watts, which is actually more than the 110 watt average. So we're going into that high intensity zone. We're going above and beyond, back to our recovery and back down. This person just got a proper warm up. They got plenty of low zone benefits, higher power outputs during the hard interval. They cooled down properly, and they got a great mix of effort, and they're fresh for their next workout. And they hit all their intensity zones that they needed for the day in the right amount of percentage. Let's talk about running now. Form a 30-minute test. 20-minute average was 181 beats per minute. We were going for heart rate here. We're now going to pop our zones into the calculator here, and this is what you would get back from me on what your zones need to be. That zone 1, zone 2, easy stuff, 130 to 163 beats per minute. And now you're going to try and stay out of on your easy aerobic runs, your long runs, 163 to 172. And if we're doing any type of other type of work, we're going to be dipping into these zones for intervals, repeats, 5K efforts, 10K efforts. Problem is, this uses a 7-zone system. Garmin only uses 5. So I'm going to show you real quick how to actually put this into your Garmin. You have to go into your Garmin device, go set up your zones. I can't do that for you. I only really look at Training Peaks anyway, so if you're looking to have your Garmin set up a certain way, we combine zone 1 and zone 2 into Garmin. So zone 1 on Garmin will have 1 and 2. We'll keep zone 2 on Garmin as zone X, and then we will do zone 3 on Garmin is zones 3 and Y. Zone 4 will stay zone 4, and zone 5 will stay zone 5. And I usually have that broken down for you on your heart rate sheet. I put the Garmin zones on the side for that reason, so you don't even have to look at it that way. So this is what your Garmin zones. If we took all of this and put it into your watch, we would go to, and the instructions I've now started putting on the new heart rate sheets. These are instructions here. Hit the Garmin Connect app, select the device up top, your little watch. Hit user profile, click heart rate and power zones, click heart rate, enter LTHR. We would enter 181 for that field. We would then click zones based on percent of LTHR, and we would adjust the percents accordingly, starting highest to lowest value. What that means is click zone 5 first, make that say 105, then click zone 4, make that say 102, click zone 3, make sure it's 95 to 102, zone 2, 90 to 95, zone 1, 72 to 90, and it should pop up with this range of BPM, and you just want to make sure that it matches that, and you can manually enter anything you need to enter that way to make it match. And again, this is what the corresponding zones would be. So you know zone 2 on your Garmin, and that's just how they label theirs on Garmin. So if you're running and you look at your heart rate and it says warm up, you know you're in that good 1 and 2 zone. And again, if you're going for a long run, you might be in that zone. It's just going to say warm up, but that just means you're in zone 1. If it says easy, that winds up being the X. That's that X zone. So if you're in an easy, easy run, but it's saying that, chances are you're in zone X. It's just the way Garmin labels their heart rate zones and the way we have to do it. So again, that's setting up your zones right there. That's what it would look like. These are percentages. That should be exactly what your screen looks like for your 181 lactate heart rate. Sample running zones based off field testing. So athlete performed a 30-minute test. 20-minute pace average was 750. We can take 95. They only did a 20-minute test, so we would take 95% of that. They would have an 813 threshold pace. It can be converted to miles per hour. If you're looking to do this on a treadmill, we could do that as well. And that's where that 813 winds up auto-populating once we enter all that in there. And again, I set all that up in Training Peaks, and I send you a copy of what your zones would look like. And again, easy runs are 1 and 2. That's our aerobic stuff. We want to skip over X when we're getting into most of our intervals, but we really need to stay out of this on our easy efforts. Here's some sample running zones based off field testing. This is for FTP, for running. Performed on a track FTP test resulted in a running FTP of 285. Once we put it in the calculator for 80/20, this is what it would give us. So we would be at 143 to 251 on those aerobic runs. If we're going to do some interval work, we want to see some numbers up there in the high 200s during our efforts. Let's look at a sample running workout across the board here for all of our training data that we might have. An athlete usually runs at 255 watts, 9:15 a mile, and 165 beats per minute. They usually say it's an RPE of 4 to 5. We want to warm up zone 1, 5 minutes, zone 2, 20 minutes, 3 by 5 minutes in zone 3. Recovery in between that is 3 minutes at zone 1. Nice jog, easy jog. Zone 2, 5 minutes, and then zone 1, 6 minutes, total of a 60-minute workout. We could go back to the graphs that this athlete had and pull out what their FTP would be for zone 1, what their pace should be for zone 1, what their heart rate should be for zone 1. Same thing with zone 2 across the board. We can even go start taking this down to RPE on a scale of what they think their RPE is for those. Very easy RPE for warm-ups, and you can see it gets harder, and then it goes back down. But FTP, pace, heart rate is what we would most likely be looking at. So if the athlete were to do this, again, look, 255 watts, we're actually going higher than that in the interval, so they're actually working harder. Easier here, but harder here than their typical habitual watts. Their 9:15 pace that they usually run, we're now running slower than that for a majority of it, but going faster than it for the interval portions. And here, heart rate wise, again, easier heart rate, going above the heart rate here for our harder stuff. And just a note on interval workouts, if you're looking at total time for your workouts, when we do something like this, 3 by 5 minutes at zone 3 with 3-minute recovery in between, the recovery effort still counts for that high intensity because of the lag and heart rate and the recovery time that it takes. So that entire block right here would actually count towards your high intensity amount for the week. So the athlete, again, got a proper warm-up, plenty of lower zone benefits, hits high power numbers during their interval, cools down properly, has gotten a great mix of effort, and is fresh for the next workout. So time versus distance workouts. Some plans and some people, I put both in there. People, majority, like to train by mileage, but it is actually more... It is better, they claim, to train by time, because if I tell you to go run 1 hour at a zone 1, zone 2 pace, heart rate, whatever modality we're going by, that's going to be an easy run. You would look at your chart, say, all right, I need to be at between 130, 163 beats per minute. And I may say, yeah, keep it below 160, and you'll be in that range. Really, take it a step back. And unfortunately, we look and I say, if you're doing 1 hour, you're just going to go run an hour, and you're going to just be looking, just heart rate and time. That's it. Not really caring about anything else. But once we start say, hey, go do 6 miles, a lot of people they start looking at pace, or they have an appointment to get to. I have to get this done. Let me just get this done as quick as possible. If I can get the 6 miles done a little sooner, I'll just do a little extra kick on that last mile. I'll get home quicker. It's actually sometimes better to convert your easy stuff just to time. So instead of, I got 12 miles to do, and you're going to do it about 10 minutes a mile, just say I'm going for a 2-hour run. Convert it. If you run 6.2 or 5.8, I really don't care. As long as you're only worrying about the zone you need to be in is actually what you're really aiming for out of that. So some people like distance, some people like time, but those are the differences between time versus base. Time can just be more precisely planned. If you know you have an hour trainer ride, that's what I'm going for. So when I do my indoor trainer rides during the week, I don't go by mileage or anything like that. It's either it's a 45-minute workout or an hour easy ride, whatever it is. I just pick a course, keep it easy, keep my power down, and get it done. I'm not too concerned about what distance I'm going. So the methodology behind it, we're almost done here. Slowing down to get the benefits. That's just the biggest takeaway out of this is there's a lot of numbers to dive in here, and I don't expect you to walk away from looking at this or hearing this and saying, it all makes sense. Just know there's going to be some field testing done. There's going to be some zones generated. And then what I do after you log a run, if I know your zones are up to date and you're supposed to go for an easy 8-mile aerobic run, you should be in zones 1 and 2. And I pull up your run on Training Peaks and I see the chart for your paces, and I see zone X, 50% of your run you were in zone X or a little bit above into zone 3. Even pace wise, I look at the pace chart and it's the same way. I know that you went a little too hard for that workout. And although you may feel great, you may feel fresh that day, like I just wanted to run, save it. Use that workout that you were supposed to do to be easy, because chances are in 2 or 3 days you're going to have a hard or a specific track workout that you need to do for running, or some type of high intensity. And when we talk about high intensity, it's not really just broken down with swimming, biking, running. It's your intensity interval for the entire week. If you train for 10 hours, whatever you may be doing for 10 hours, 80% of that has to be at that lower intensity. If you're hitting Orange Theory or F45 3 or 4 mornings a week and you're jacking your heart rate up for 45 minutes to an hour, that's going to be high intensity work. And that's when we're going to have to take some of the high intensity away from the specificity training that we need to do for your swimming, biking, and running. So if that can make sense on, where the intensity comes from, it's your total intensity for the week. So it doesn't need to be precise. We need to. So at the takeaway on this is you don't have to hit this 100% in the zone every time, but you need to just break out of the habit of just doing things because that's the way they're always done. We break apart low intensity, we push for the high intensity. And when I talk about high intensity, which you'll see on the next slide, what's hard is hard, but hard is not failure. And you just got to understand the principles of how to apply this, that there is field testing, there are zones created, it's all adjusted, and we need to play within those zones as best as possible. And you'll see longer sustained results using this methodology. And, you're just sustainability. That's one of the biggest things I hang my hat on is sustainability. If you only want to go do racing or training for a year or two, we could smash you up and throw a lot of high intensity at you. But if you're looking to do this for years after years, or you see the people out there that are a decade or two older than you still doing it, this is how you're going to get there. You want to be able to get there and still make improvements year after year. So in closing, when it's easy, we just got to go easy. We warm up, cool down, the rest during the intervals, our aerobic runs, that stuff's we got to take a back seat and be easy. If you're out of breath talking during your run when it's supposed to be an easy run, you got to slow down. You got to find other people to run with that are more your pace, your style, your speed. It is okay to push again a little bit. There is some flexibility in there. We all do it, but the majority, you'll see better results if you start to push these two intensities away from each other. So it's time to go hard, you go hard. Sustained efforts, hard efforts for what's called for. If you have 1,000-meter efforts, 5,000-meter efforts at the track, you're going to run as hard as you can sustain each of those 1,000-meter efforts to be almost identical time-wise, but not hitting failure. Hard does not mean failure. I actually can't remember a time so far, knock on wood, that I have trained with endurance to failure where I couldn't hit the prescribed workout because I went too hard or pushed too hard even during a race where I completely just done, bonked, can't go any further just because I didn't, just went too hard. And this is going to help with race pacing. Remember, a 5x4 minute interval for running will help you pace the interval steady throughout all the efforts with practice. It's going to take a little bit of practice. You may go a little too fast those first two. Be like, oh man, I need to slow down for the third because I really want to hit the fourth one. That's fine. And that's just going to help you come race day. You'll be better at pacing for the distance of the day. When you do those 5K fun runs, those 10K races, start doing half marathons, a little more competitively within your age group, you'll actually start learning how to pace better. You don't always want to go out and go steady. Do it like you do the field testing. When you're doing your heart rate field testing, you want to head out for those 30 minutes, progressing into it. Just like your FTP test on the bike. If you go hammer out right away, top end FTP, it's going to fall off towards the end of the 30 minutes. You want to peak into it. And that's everything with endurance training. That's your training in general. We want to peak you into race day. And we're going to have another talk about periodized training and volume and things like that. But this was all about, specificity and intensity and zones and being like that. So I hope you got something out of this. It clarified a little bit. My goal with this is to put it out here in video form so you can consume it at any amount you want or revisit it and watch it as many times as you want. Go through the slides as best as you can and then come back with questions so we can talk about it and go over it together. So I appreciate your time. Again, go hard when it's hard, not to failure, easy when it's easy. Separate the two. Have fun with it. Enjoy your training. You should be fresh for your training. You shouldn't be dreading going to do what, we should be loving to do and what we're paying to do. And that's it. Stay safe, stay healthy. Remember, balance that life 1 mile at a time, and I'll see you on the next one.